This episode of the Good Living Now podcast is sponsored by our friends at Kuvings. Now, I've had almost every brand of juicer on the market since I started my healing journey in 2015. But the Kuvings Auto 10 has been a complete game changer. It's easy to use and easy to clean. Plus, I'm able to make smoothies as well as sorbets and plant-based milk. So use my code JUICEGUY and save 10%. All right, you know what to do. Get your juice on. Welcome to the Good Living Now podcast, where we talk to real people about real change leading to real health. I'm your host, Harold LaFall, and today, we have an incredible story. My guest lost 200 pounds, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, as well as erectile dysfunction through a plant-based diet. Well, he's here to tell us his story. Welcome to the show, Adam Sudd. Hey, Adam, how you doing, man?
Great. How are you? Man, I can tell you what, that voice of yours, that is really something. I love it. I could listen to that all day.
Oh, wow. Thank you, man. Thank you so much. Man, when I saw you in a video and learned your story, I was so inspired and wanted just to know more. I'm like, how did you get to a place where you were able to reverse advanced type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and lose 200 pounds? But then I thought, well, wait a minute, I want to know what got him there. How did you get to the place where you were 350 pounds? Can you kind of take us back to the journey that got you to that place?
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm a sixth or seventh generation Texan, right? So I grew up eating burgers and barbecue, right? This was what was on my plate. This was what was on my friends' plates. This was what was in the schools. This is what our parents celebrated with, and my friends' parents celebrated with. So of course, it's everywhere. It's the entire environment, right? And in fact, I had an amazing childhood. Really, I was born with an identical twin brother. So
so y'all look just alike. So
yeah,
it's another.
Yeah. That's right. I was born with a best friend, and then I got another best friend a couple years later when my little sister was born. And we lived in a neighborhood where all of our friends were in the neighborhood, and we would ride our bikes to and from school. And it was really this. I had a dad who taught me how to play every single sport under the sun, and a mom who really inspired my imagination and really was just so great at cultivating creativity. And I want to tell everyone that there's so much about my childhood that I absolutely loved and still have the most incredible memories of. But what's really interesting, and I don't understand really why, by the time I was about 10, 11 years old, first of all, I just want to say my dad, when I was born, my dad is my hero. My dad, it's hard to put into words like how much I adore and respect and admire this man. And so much so as a little kid. I mean, I think it's fair to say for a lot of people, their dad is like Superman to them. Right. And I don't understand why, but probably about around 10 years old, my dad stopped being my hero and he started to act like my bully. He would criticize my weight. He would criticize if I did something, if I didn't do something. I found myself living in a hypercritical environment, and I don't understand what happened. I didn't what I had done wrong. How did I not know what I had done wrong? How am I going to figure out what it was that I did wrong? Because when you're 10, 11 years old, your entire world is your parents. And if your parents don't feel like a safe place to be, the world doesn't feel like a safe place to be.
Right.
And that's how I started to feel. I became very anxious. I became very hypervigilant. I was very worried about how people were responding to me because I needed to know if I was making a mistake, if I wasn't good enough to be in front of them. And so, of course, I also started to engage in class clown behavior because I wanted someone, if they were going to look at me, not see me, right? See a distraction. And so I was taken to a doctor and I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And this was just another moment in time where my parents had taken me to a physician, to a person in a white coat, an individual of authority, for the sole purpose of trying to find out, is there something wrong with you? And turns out they found this thing out. And now this is not what the doctor said. These are not the words the doctor used, but essentially what I heard as an 11, 12-year-old was, Adam, there's something about you that doesn't work, that's broken, that's unacceptable to the world and to your parents, and we have to fix it. And thankfully, we have a solution for you. And it looks like this little pill, and it's called Ritalin. And what you're going to do is you're going to take this pill every single day, and it is going to hide the parts that are unacceptable to the world. That's your job. Don't ever be yourself in the world or in front of your parents, because it is not okay. Again, that's not what the doctor said, but
right.
That's how it felt. And I certainly didn't get any other kind of explanation as to what was going on. And I became a very insecure, anxious, and an angry kid. And my dad and I, we would get into shouting matches, and I was certainly a difficult child to be around. But I want to tell you, like, I just felt like the world had stopped feeling like a safe, secure, and hopeful place to be. And we moved to Austin from Houston right before I started high school. And I was really worried because I had a lot of friends in my neighborhood that when the world didn't feel safe, they could make the world feel safe for me. And I got taken away from them at a point in your life where high school is a big deal.
Right.
And it feels big. And I was so afraid that I was going to be thrown into an environment where I didn't know anyone and I was going to be the target of bullying. And that is exactly what happened. In fact, the bullying, both physically and verbally, was so intense that when I got dropped off at school, about halfway through my freshman year of high school, when I got dropped off at school, the assistant principals would have to get their eyes on me to make sure that I made it into school safely. Like, that's how bad it was. And at about this time, they had changed my prescription of Ritalin to a new medication called Adderall. And I'm sure everyone here has heard of it. It's a very popular medication. And it is an amphetamine-based stimulant medication used to treat attention deficit disorder and other conditions. And I would take a dose in the morning, and I would take a second dose in the middle of class. And I remember I would take the pill right before class started, about halfway through school. And I would walk out of the classroom, and I would always go to the right. I didn't want to go to the left. That was not a good direction to go. And as I walk out, I get this arm around my neck and just drags me over. And I'm obviously assuming that I'm about to get beat up or something. In fact, it is some of the guys that were bullying me. And they said, "Hey, Adam, listen, just want you to know, all that bullying stuff, the hazing, it's all over with. You have to understand, you're a freshman, you're new to the school, you didn't know anybody, and this is just the way it is, right? We got, you got to take your dues, kind of thing. But we're going to make it up to you. We want you to come to a party this weekend. Here's the address. It's going to be great. Bring that with you." Obviously, they had seen me take it in class. Now, I may have been a nerdy, awkward freshman. In fact, I was. Like, without a doubt, I was. But I wasn't stupid. And I knew exactly what was taking place. And the interesting thing, Harold, is I felt relief. I didn't feel deceived. I didn't feel manipulated. I felt like, oh my gosh, this might be a way for me to not be harmed anymore. If I am this person for them, I don't get hurt.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I was incredibly isolated and lonely. I didn't have any friends. And while I know this wasn't friendship, it looked a lot like it.
Right.
It looked enough like it that I wanted it. So I went to that party, and that was the first night I ever used it as a recreational drug. I actually didn't even know that was a thing to do until that night. And I'm going to tell you that the moment that high dose took effect, it was almost as if I heard a voice from the universe gently whisper into my ear, "You figured it out." Because all of this anxiety, all of the pains in my life, I would wake up into a body that my parents and my bullies had got me to believe wasn't a safe, secure, or hopeful place to be. I go to school every day. That certainly physically and verbally didn't feel like a safe, secure, or hopeful place to be. Right? And I always lived in the sense that tomorrow would be equally difficult, if not even more difficult. Now that that is the breeding ground for depression and anxiety. There's a phenomenal quote about depression by a man named Johann Hari, British journalist who wrote the book called Lost Connections, maybe the best book on depression and anxiety that I've ever read in my life. He says, you should really think of depression as a form of grief for your life not feeling as it should. And that is how my life felt every single day. Now, you take an insecure, lonely, awkward kid and you flood him with amphetamine. All of a sudden, unbelievable amounts of confidence and energy. Not only that, my presence at the party excited people. They were happy to see me there. Maybe not because it was me, but they were. They looked at me and they go, "Hey, that guy's here." That feels like community. It isn't, but it feels like it,
Feels
right?
like it, yeah.
I was slightly overweight as a freshman. I noticed after a couple weeks of abusing it, weight's just coming off. Because remember, Adderall is amphetamine. That's what the stuff is. And so when you flood your body with amphetamine, your hunger drive goes down, your metabolism goes up. I started to have people want to be around me, invite me to other events, invite me to hang out with them, go out to lunch with them. I was sitting at different tables at lunch at school. People were looking at me, "You're hanging out with those guys? Oh my gosh, now I have some kind of self-esteem."
Right.
My relationship with my dad changed in about 2 weeks. And obviously my dad wasn't aware I was abusing, but I can pause and consider from his subjective point of view what he was seeing. He saw his son no longer complaining about school, no longer complaining about getting beat up, having study habits he's never seen before, and losing weight. He saw all these things occurring, and then I heard the words I've been waiting my whole life, "Attaboy."
Oh,
My
wow.
dad said words of pride to me.
Right.
The minute that happened, I want you to take a second to consider how that felt. When you live in a life that doesn't feel like a safe, secure, or hopeful place to be, if your life looked like mine and your life felt like mine and you were to use like I did, what you would notice is that that use looked and felt almost exactly like self-care. And that's what addiction at its core really is. It's completely misguided self-care. Every instinct in you responds to that substance going, "That made me feel safe, secure, and hopeful for the first time. That allowed me to escape pain for the first time in ways I've never been able to do it before. And with ease and repeatability like I've never seen before, that must be the right direction to go. Let's keep going that direction." Nothing bad has happened. We're not bankrupt. We're not homeless. We haven't ruined relationships. We're still good. Let's keep going. And so I bonded with it. I bonded with that behavior, and it got me through high school. It got me into college. And then I hit the same point that every person who abuses long enough hits, which is where more is never enough. And never enough is the ever constant problem. Where am I going to get more? How much is it going to cost? Where am I going to get the money to pay for it? All of a sudden, the loving and meaningful bonds in life that give all of us the experience of feeling meaningfully alive were becoming severed and replaced with important needs around drug use. My life went from a life of meaning to a life of using. And all of a sudden, I fell into it and I couldn't get out. And I ended up dropping out of college. I became a criminal addict. I was buying and selling on the street. I was stealing from people. I was treating my family like garbage. And I had developed such a high tolerance for the substances that no matter how much I got, I'd be out in about 2 weeks. And so I needed something to fill the gap. And fast food became that convenient, repeatable, and obvious solution. If I just eat fast food, I can numb myself up, survive these 2 weeks without using, get more, do that for 2 weeks, and then start the whole cycle all over again. And that's what probably the next 3 years of my life would look like.
Wow.
I was just scraping by, doing whatever job I could, stealing from people, trying to get money however I could, just so that I could get drugs. And it was interesting because I was obviously aware. My weight was approaching 300 pounds. I was eating about 5,000 calories of fast food a day. I was doing 6 days straight, and I wouldn't sleep. I wouldn't eat, and I would end up in the beginning stages of a drug-induced psychosis where the only way to get myself out of it was to either pop opiates or do a small amount of so that I could fall asleep and then do the food binge until I got more. That was my day-to-day life.
Wow. So you were doing, so in addition, you were doing others as well at that point.
Yeah, there were others that I used as, this is a terrible way to put it. I would use them as supplements to like get me out of a bad situation that the stimulants had created. And eventually you're not even at normal, you're way below normal. But the only way to get even back to a feeling, a sense of normalcy, is to do incredibly high amounts of stimulants. And that's just never going to work. Also, I haven't slept in days. I'm becoming very paranoid. I would hallucinate. I would see and hear things. I developed obsessive compulsive tics that were debilitating. And so what I would do in that point was like, all right, how many oxys do I need to do to make sure I go to sleep right now? Because if I go to sleep right now, I'll sleep for 20 hours, wake up, I'm all out of stimulants. I'll binge on fast food while I figure out how to get just enough money to buy 2 more weeks worth so that I could use it for about 6 days, because I go through 2 weeks worth in about 6 days. And that was my day-to-day life. And on top of that, of course, blaming my parents and family for everything that was wrong, shaming them on a daily basis, asking them for money, and running out of money myself. I mean, I was losing jobs left and right, losing friends left and right. And it was at this time that my dad came to my rescue. And my dad and I weren't really talking a lot then. And my dad was part of the founding of Whole Foods Market. And as a result of being part of the Whole Foods Market company, at the time they had partnered with a man named Rip Esselstyn. And Rip Esselstyn is the creator of what was then called the Engine 2 diet, because he created it while being a firefighter at the Engine 2 firehouse in Austin, inspired by his dad, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, from the film Forks Over Knives, the cardiologist who helped reverse heart disease, the early studies of heart disease reversal. And Rip had written this book, and John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, had decided he wanted to use Rip's knowledge and the work in his book to empower his team members and also customers to be healthier plant-based people. And so he created a program called the Engine 2 Total Health Immersion, where they would take employees who would pre-qualify based on private metabolic, scans, because what he wanted to do is he wanted to take people who needed it the most and offer it to them for free. So he would take 100 Whole Foods Market team members at about $5,000 per person and send them to this 7-day retreat to learn all of the basic knowledge of plant-based nutrition, follow a plant-based diet for 6 days, give measurements before and after, and see the remarkable change that can happen in just 7 days, and then empower them to take that into their private lives and become healthier people. And my dad was talking to me about this, and he said, Adam, it's really only available to Whole Foods Market team members, but we have 2 spots available, and I can give one of them to you, and I want you to do this. He said things like, I'm scared. I know there's something else going on. I can guess what it is, but I don't know, and I don't want to guess what it is. I just want to help you. And now the thing is, you have to go and you have to meet Rip at the headquarters, and you have to convince him to give you a spot, because technically it's his program. Like, we just secure spots for him. It's his program. Now listen, I didn't want to know what a plant-based diet was. I didn't know what a plant-based diet was. I didn't know who Rip Esselstyn was. I did not want to know who Rip Esselstyn was.
Right.
What I knew was that if I could convince Rip to give me a spot, I could convince my dad to give me money. I knew the pathway to getting some kind of supplemental income. I could create some story like, Dad, I went, it's great, but you don't know how tough this is going to be. And if you could just give me, $500 a month or whatever it is to support me, I'm going to do this thing. Like, all these schemes started coming in my mind. Yeah. So I went down to the headquarters and I did what every addict is supremely talented at doing, which is crafting a phenomenal lie. I even read some of your book, Rip. Sounds really amazing. Like, I can't wait to do it. And I went. He gave me a spot. I went. And I listened to everything that was being said. I listened to luminary thought leaders and doctors. And I wish I could tell you that that's where my life changed. I wish I could tell you that I left and said, this all makes sense. And it did. I know how to do it. And I did. And then I did it. The problem is, I wasn't willing to give up what was allowing me to escape a life that was too painful a place to be on the gamble that it might work in a year. That's just way too terrifying for me. And so by 2012, my life was the worst it had ever been. I was 30 years old. I was 2 weeks away from being homeless. I had cuts on my legs from scratching mosquito bites that had got infected. They wouldn't heal for reasons I didn't understand. I had erectile dysfunction for reasons I didn't understand. I was going to the bathroom all the time. I was constantly thirsty. I had headaches. I had brain fog. I had migraines. Living hurt every single day. I was also isolated. I had no purpose, no community of shared respect, and no sense that tomorrow was going to be a place I wanted to be. Now, you live there long enough, and eventually tomorrow is a place you don't want to be a part of. And so on August 21st of 2012, I tried to end my life. And I remember I just kept taking pills. It was kind of like this mindless action, as if there was a part of me that just could no longer tolerate being in this world. And I tried to stand up off my couch. And as I did, it felt like I got stabbed in the right side. And I start to fall forward. And as I do, I see my vision going black. And I'm going to tell you that the feeling that I had in that moment, I don't know what it feels like to die, but I know exactly what it feels like to believe that you're dying with a life full of regret. I don't know if dying is something to be afraid of, but I do know that that is worth your fear. That was the most terrifying moment of my entire life. And I can remember before everything went black, I remember kind of like shouting out to the universe, just asking for one more second. And I survived. I woke up on the floor of my apartment, and I remember feeling that same immense relief. Every cell of my body was just beaming with relief, which I found confusing because I didn't think I wanted to live anymore. It turns out that relief that I felt could only be possible if there was something about myself and my life that I loved enough. Something about myself and my life that was meaningful enough, so irreplaceable, so important that even though I knew this was going to be the most difficult day I'd ever had, I was feeling relieved to be a part of it. And that's kind of what finally spurred me into making that phone call and saying those 3 words I'd been avoiding for 15 years to my parents, which is, I need help. And 2 weeks later, they helped me back in the rehab. So that's how I got there.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a journey.
Yeah.
What a journey. And so you reached out to your parents and told them that you needed help.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Yeah. My parents didn't do any of the I told you so's, which was really important for me because I was already ashamed enough. They actually said something that I think might have been the most important words I'd ever heard, which is, Adam, we don't know what to do. And we love you. We love you whether you're using or you're not. We love you whatever state you're in. We don't know what's the right move to make, but we want you to come home and let us figure that out together. They reminded me that I was not an addict who was their son. I was their son who was struggling with addiction.
Wow.
And that made me feel so loved. It reminded me that there was a place within that community of shared respect that they had been saving for me. I didn't see it anymore, but they reminded me that it was there. And they reminded me that they were holding it for me, that it was not going to be filled by anybody but me. And that I think that more so than solutions to our problems, certainly from our family and friends, people who are struggling with end-stage substance use disorder and depression and anxiety, we just want to be reminded that we've not been forgotten. We want to be reminded that we matter to somebody in the world, and we matter whether we're addicted or we're not, whether we're healthy or we're not. Just by the singular purpose, the singular fact that we're alive in this world, we then matter to them. And so I came home and we figured out where to go. And about 2 weeks after that date, my parents flew out with me to check into rehab. And man, so listen, I'd never been to rehab before, but my gosh, I'd seen movies, I heard the stories. Like, obviously, I'm thinking, what's detox going to be like? I'm terrified. And, I was the kind of person who I couldn't do a moment of life without using. So I was high when I checked into rehab. And you walked in the front doors and there's a long hallway. And at the end of the long hallway, there's these big medical doors. And above it, there's 3 letters that say MAS, which is like medically assisted something or other. It's essentially an acronym for their term for detox. I'm sweating bullets, I'm terrified. all the questions are running in my mind. What if this doesn't work? What if I don't like life without? What if I fail at this thing? All of the questions which are leading me to the question, which is you should just turn around and get out of here. Like, this is not going to work.
Yeah.
Door opens and I see this nurse and she's walking down the hallway. She's walking to me. She's got her eyes fixed on me. And I remember it was kind of strange. Maybe the universe chooses these people to be nurses, because I felt so calm looking at her. And she took my hand and she led me back into the detox area, where the first 24 hours are pretty difficult. You kind of feel dehumanized in a way. You feel a little bit like a criminal. And the reason for that is they search you, they search your belongings, they put you through a whole host of medical examinations, physical and blood examinations, psychological evaluations, emotional evaluations. I mean, you feel like you're poked and prodded. And I remember myself, I'd probably spent the last 2 years completely severed from caring about my body. In fact, I actively hated it. And I would spend many days practicing self-harm as some sense of wanting to hurt myself enough to want to be different. And so standing in a doctor's office with nurses and having them do like a full naked examination was a very humiliating experience for me, because again, I felt like they were looking for what was wrong with me. But that's not what they were doing. They were caring for me. And so check into treatment, end-stage substance use disorder. The only thing that gives them a sense of safety in their life is their drug. And what they're doing, checking into treatment, that's an extraordinary effort. That's a very terrifying experience. So it would make sense that just having a little bit with them will give them the courage to do something extraordinary. We're not bringing it in to give it to anyone. We're certainly not bringing it in to threaten anyone, but that's why it's there. That's why it was there for me. And so they want to make sure that that's not going to happen. They take it from you. They want to make sure that you're not bringing in anything else that could be a trigger for someone. There are people there with gambling addiction. So having a sports team on your shirt could be a trigger for people. I didn't know this. I'm glad that they told me that. They also want to know, what other biological, metabolic, and psychological issues are you struggling with? Because people who engage in substance use disorder to the degree that I did are also doing and not doing things that are good and bad for your health. So what else is going on? And after about 48 hours, I went and talked to the doctor, and I'm sitting across from the table, and I walk in arrogant, like somehow believing I'm going to get a clean bill of health. And he diagnosed me with type 2 diabetes. In fact, so for people who don't know, there's a biomarker called an A1C. Your A1C is a biomarker that we use to determine whether you are a insulin sensitive, healthy metabolic state, whether you're in the pre-diabetic range or whether you're in the diabetic range. And the way that they do that is there's a number expressed in percentages. So if you are, if your A1C is below 5.7%, you are in the healthy range. If it's 5.7 to 6.4%, you're in the pre-diabetic range. Not technically diabetes, but it gives a sense things are going in the wrong direction. If you're above 6.4%, you are technically type 2 diabetic. My A1C was a 12. So I was very diabetic. My fasting blood glucose was 390. Right? So a healthy fasting blood glucose should be between 70 and 100 at any given time. Mine was 390. So that's in a fasting state.
Wow.
And he puts me on, they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put you on the highest dose of oral diabetes medication. Probably not going to work well. We're likely going to need to put you on insulin at some point after rehab. Adam, I want you to know there's nothing you can do about this. This is a genetic condition, and that it will likely progress. You're at risk of losing your eyesight, losing limbs, losing your hearing. Adam, you have a cholesterol of over 300. Your blood pressure is 210 over 115. So blood pressure medication, we're going to put you on a statin. Heart disease is a genetic condition. It runs in your family, clearly, because I have had family members that have had heart disease. No big shocker. They live in the US. And so we're going to medicate you for this. However, you're at a very real risk of having a cardiovascular event within the next 5 years. In fact, we're worried you're going to have one while you're here. So we're going to monitor your blood pressure every morning and every night while you're here. You have your class 3 obese. The data on weight loss isn't very good. You can do the best you can, lose a little bit of weight, but you're likely always going to be overweight. We're going to put you on medication for depression, anxiety, sleep disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And they also diagnosed me with something called obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So I was put on about 15 medications.
Wow, that had to be a lot to just absorb all of those diagnoses that they were giving you at one time.
It was pretty overwhelming, but what shocked me the most was what he said next. He goes, Adam, if you want your life to get better, you have to stop. And I remember thinking to myself, that might have been the worst prescription for change I'd ever heard, because I knew how bad my life felt. And I thought I knew how terrifying my future was going to be. But this doctor just painted a future for me that was far more difficult, far more painful, far less hopeful than anything I had imagined. And he said, you're going to get there. Period. End of story. That is your future. Well, if that is my future, what urgency do I have to change anything? Why would it matter to me to stop using?
Right.
If anything, I should double down on my use.
Right.
I have no interest in being a part of that future. That's not something I want to experience. I don't want to tolerate what that is going to be. And I remember I got pretty angry. And to be fair, I actually really did like the doctor. He's a very, very good doctor. I got really angry, and I went back to the dorm room at the rehab facility, and I called my dad, and I told him I was going to leave. And he said, Adam, I don't know what's going on, but it hasn't been a week. I'm sure it hasn't been easy. You got to tell me what's going on, because I don't know, and I'd love to help. And I told him everything. I said, Dad, I came here. All I wanted to do was stop using. Now I find out I have diabetes, I have heart disease, I have all these psychological conditions. They put me on all these medications. They're telling me all these things are going to happen to me. And I don't want to deal with any of it. I don't want to do this. And my dad said to me, Adam, you know what? I believe you. And I believe that you have got to be very, very scared. I would probably be as scared as you are. And, I don't know if we can do anything about this. I don't know. I'm not there to see the labs or anything. I'm not a doctor. But what I do know is that you spent 7 days at a retreat with a guy who also had some pretty remarkable doctors. And they said a very different story, didn't they? They talked about how maybe perhaps all those conditions you're struggling with are the appropriate responses to the life you had been living. And then if you want to, you can reverse them, and you know how to do it. Adam, I'm going to give you some advice, and I really want you to listen to me. My dad would know about this because my dad has suffered significant trauma in his life. He lost his dad. When my dad was young, he lost his dad to cancer. He lost his mom in an accident. And he lost his sister to heart failure. Adam, if there's something about your life that's difficult, that's painful, and you can do something about it, you don't have a problem. And Adam, if there's something in your life that's difficult, that's painful, and there's nothing you can do about it, it's not a problem. It's the way things are. And perhaps, maybe we can start taking charge of the things that we can change. And perhaps your care team there, along with your mom and I, we can help you see those other things in a different way so that it's not so overwhelming for you. First of all, I don't know where this sage of wisdom came from, Dad, but I also remember being like, hang on a minute. Maybe my dad is my ally. He and I just didn't understand each other. Maybe I didn't fully understand that my dad's criticism about me and my health was a response to losing so many people that he cared about when he was younger. Maybe I didn't understand how he was trying to care for me. I wish he'd done it differently. I really do.
Right.
But maybe I understand it better. And so maybe I should listen to this. And I did. And I said, this is what I'm going to do. I don't know anything about depression, anxiety, and addiction at that point. I didn't know anything. I knew what the stories everyone had been told, but what I did understand is how to live a plant-based diet well enough, right? I didn't know everything, but I'd done it for 7 days. I remember what I did. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to eat a whole food plant-based diet in recovery. Well, the rehab facility wouldn't let me do that. They wouldn't let me change my diet. They certainly weren't about to let me eat a high carbohydrate diet with diabetes that advanced. They weren't willing to listen. They weren't willing to talk about it. So that's fine. After 37 days in a rehab hospital, I moved into a sober living facility in Santa Monica, California. And a sober living facility it's a halfway house.
Yeah.
Where you live with like 10 other people who are similar in your age, who are also trying to discover, how do we do this thing called life now, divorced from, like, how do we do that? How do we care for ourselves? How do we find purpose? And the great thing about this sober living facility is that you get to decide how you feed yourself, and the things that you do, and your therapy and your group therapies. And the house is just a place for you to live, where people make sure that you take care of yourself. They help you learn the habits for caring for yourself again, and they ensure that you do the things you need to do to move forward in your recovery. And I walked into the sober living facility, and I decided, this is it. This is my opportunity. I'm going to eat an entirely whole food plant-based diet, and I'm going to reverse my diabetes and my heart disease, and I'm going to lose weight, and that's what I'm going to do. The way that it worked is, every week you would write out a list of things that you needed, and the house manager would give the list of your things and everyone else's to assistant managers, who would go out to the store and they would buy all the things, come back, and then we could stock the house with all the things you need for myself and for all the other guys in the house. I started thinking, okay, all right, what did I eat the most of when I was at the retreat? And I remember I had oatmeal every morning. I remember rice and beans were on the buffet for lunch every single day. And I remember fruit and potatoes, like fruit for snacks all the time. And there was like all these sweet potatoes in the evening. And so okay, great. There we go. I need oatmeal. I need rice. I need beans. I need fruit. And I need potatoes. That was the list. It was just those like 5 things. So I walked up to the house manager, whose last name is actually Hamburger. And I said, I need these things, please. And he goes, Adam, there's only 5 things on this list. I said, I know, but I just need enough of those for a week. And he said to me, if this is what you need to do, we'll get it for you. And I remember waking up the next day being the most inspired I'd ever been in my life. Like, I was ready. Day one, right? Walk to the pantry, open it up, and there's the oatmeal that I asked for. And they put it right next to a box of Fruity Pebbles, which is the greatest cereal of all time. And Harold, I don't even remember what happened. I just remember throwing a fit, yelling, throwing something at somebody, running out of the house, storming down the street. An assistant manager, a guy named Luke Chittick, had to run after me, and he calmed me down. He goes, Adam, let me just tell you what we all saw happen. We were all sitting at the table having breakfast. You walked into the kitchen, you opened a pantry, and then you went berserk. You started yelling at people. You ran out of the house. People are like, is he high? Is he on something? We got to figure out, Adam, what's going on? What just happened? Now, he's able to calm me down. I probably wasn't the nicest person to him in that moment because I was angry. But I got back to the house, and it was the question that he asked, what happened? That really piqued my interest, because I didn't understand why it was hard, right? Like, why couldn't this be a matter of intellect and will, right? Knowing what to do it. Why isn't that just the entire equation for change?
Yeah.
And in between intellect and will, why did my will get severed? What took place that made doing the right thing feel so wrong, and doing the wrong thing feel so attractive? What was that about? Because I was creating a story that, like, I must be weak. I must have no willpower. I must not really want this change. And I stumbled across the work of a guy named Doug Lisle. Doug Lisle is the author of a book called The Pleasure Trap, and he delivers a TEDx talk called The Pleasure Trap. It's phenomenal. I remember watching that TED talk, 17 minutes, and I watched it again and again and again. And after watching it about 5 times, the entire world felt different to me, because the pleasure trap is answering a singular question. If we know what to do to be happy and healthy, why is it so difficult to do it?
Right.
Turns out that we have a psychological and a motivational architecture inside of us that compels our behavior. And it's compelling our behavior in order to solve a singular problem, which is to survive in a specific environment. Every instinct in you, your survival instincts, have been crafted through thousands and thousands of years of evolution to survive a very specific environment, an environment of scarcity, competition, right? This is not the environment that we live in. But when your goal is to survive in an environment of scarcity and competition, a psychology that's trying to figure out how to get the most for the least will always win. And how you know what to do is that you have this incredible neurotransmitter called dopamine. Dopamine is like a guidance system trying to help us figure out, if we try two things, which is the better choice, which is the most efficient, what gives us the most amount of pleasure for the least amount of pain and the least amount of energy. If we figure that out, we win. So if you were to think of experiencing pleasure, pleasure is your signal that you have statistically increased your likelihood of survival. That's the purpose of pleasure, of dopamine's pleasure. Is a sense that something that you've done something, and that thing that you have done is increasing your likelihood of survival. The higher the lift in the dopamine circuitry, the more likely that choice is to help you survive versus another choice. The thing is, turns out you have a range of experiencing pleasure that's appropriate to your psychology, meaning that it will always be just pleasurable enough that you'll want to do that thing when you need it, but it won't be so pleasurable that you would risk your life to do more of it, right? But as we started to mess with the modern environment, as we started to introduce what we will call super normal stimuli, we've started to mess with that guidance system. We're exposing ourselves to a choices that elicit a pleasure response that goes way outside the bounds of what is appropriate to our psychology. And our psychology defends itself against this intense stimulus, and it dulls our dopamine receptors. And as you dull your dopamine receptors, you experience what we'll call a progressive narrowing of the things that give you pleasure, a progressive narrowing of the things that make you feel like you're doing well, until all that's left are hyperpalatable foods and very potent. These are the only things that work anymore. That is the biological mechanisms of addiction and compulsion. So now when you're in my situation, you've exposed yourself to very powerful drugs and very calorie dense foods for years, and you go in and you decided today's the day, I'm going to choose oatmeal over Fruity Pebbles. Your survival instincts look at you and go, are you out of your mind? Terrible compared to that.
Right.
This is the worst decision we've ever thought of in our life. We can't do this. You have to choose the Fruity Pebbles. In fact, trying to not pick them will feel wrong. Every instinct is organized around solving a singular problem, which is getting the most for the least. And in the modern environment, it's going to lead you in the wrong direction. And this is essentially the modern cause of the modern obesity epidemic. If you were to think of it as a story, Doug Lisle talks about going out at night and looking at your porch light. If you have your porch light on at night, what you'll notice is that there are moths and they're attracted to the light. The reason why they're attracted to the light is because they're actually designed by nature to use the brightest lights in the sky, celestial objects, for navigation. It's how they feel what to do in order to survive. But when now the brightest light in the sky is no longer the natural celestial lights, when now the brightest light in the sky is an artificial light bulb that you have introduced into the environment, that animal is now confused and hits that light and flutters down and hits it again, and eventually it dies. And you would watch this occur and you go, oh my gosh, look at that. Must have been something psychologically broken in that moth. Something must have gone wrong in its biology and psychology. Certainly that one, but not only that, look at all these others that just witnessed their friend die and do the exact same thing. How could this not be disordered behavior? But if you were to pause and consider from a subjective point of view, what's actually taking place is that animal is thinking and feeling like it's doing exactly what it's been designed by nature to do. It's thinking and feeling like it's being successful when in fact it's self-destructive. It's going to hit it again, and eventually it's going to die. What's happened is that by messing with the environment, by introducing a supernormal stimulus, a stimulus that was never supposed to be there, that was never supposed to exist, that animal will always run the threat of making poor decisions, feeling successful while doing it. When I did this, all the shame was lifted from me. I realized I needed to do one singular thing. I needed to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Make the choice. If I could do that, my dopamine receptors would regain their sensitivity. They would recalibrate to what is appropriate for me. And eventually the healthy choice would feel right. In fact, it takes about 4 months to completely resensitize your dopamine receptors, but about 80% of that occurs within just the first 14 days. So I had a goal. I was going to do this 14 days because I knew on day 15 it would feel completely differently. And I would get up every single day, would prepare a meal on a plate that was about health and wellness. Prepare a meal on a plate that was about choosing to be the healthiest version of myself today, healthier than I was the day before, not because I was trying to get rid of disease, but because I was trying to care for my life. I think that's a really important distinction.
That is.
I came to this from a conversation with Phil Hamburger. We were in my room in my sober living, and he was asking about the day that I survived my suicide. And I don't think I was actually ready to talk about it, but he was kind of pushing me on it. And he asked me a question. He goes, "Why do you think you didn't die?" And I was angry that he asked that. And I just said the first thing that came to my head. I said, "I don't know, Phil, maybe my body didn't want me to die." And I remember hearing those words, like actually hearing the words, maybe my body didn't want me to die. What if my body has never been my adversary? Because I grew up believing my body was my enemy. This adversary that I had to get up every single day and through exertion and restriction and self-harm, try to defeat enough times to win some superficial battle on a scale that I might win once or twice, but I was going to lose over the course of time for sure. Turns out, what if my body has been fighting for me since the day I was born? What if the entire reason why I survived everything I went through, decades of poor food choices, self-harm, bullying, addiction, trying to end my own life. What if the reason why I survived all this is because my body has never let me down? The greatest ally I will ever have in my entire life. I do believe that to be true. And if that is true, and I believe it is, my goal is not to restrict a darn thing from this body. I'm not spending a single day avoiding meat, eggs, and dairy. I'm spending every day actively choosing to care for the body, to give it the things it needs to do what it has been wanting to do since the day I was born, to be the healthiest version of myself. As soon as I embodied that perspective, choosing the healthy choice felt so empowering, so connected, such a way, a vehicle of reconnecting me to a life that felt like being alive. And I my diabetes and my heart disease and my erectile dysfunction within 5 months. I was about 150 pounds in a year, and I got off every single medication, even all my psych meds within 1 year. I've been meds. I've been sober now for 13 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
And then I was actually able to lead the very first controlled trial investigating the effects of nutrient-dense dietary patterns on addiction recovery outcomes in treatment facilities. So the first study ever done on diet and addiction, I led that back in 2019, and we published it in 2022. And I was part of an organization called Mastering Diabetes. I got really kind of radical and fanatical. I wanted to understand the nutritional biochemistry of why does it make sense to people in the diabetic? Why is it a disorder? Why is it a reasonable response to life? Because once you can understand the cause and you can make it, and it can make sense to you, you can reverse engineer insulin sensitivity. So I took that kind of fascination, and I wanted to apply it to anxiety and depression. I wanted to understand why these things made sense. I wanted to understand why they aren't biology and psychology gone wrong, but rather biology and psychology gone right and environments gone terribly wrong. And if that's the case, how do we empower people to build an environment that looks so much like the life they want, that by living there long enough, it becomes the life they want, right? And so that's been my mission for like the last, 8 years.
Wow, man, what an incredible journey. I normally ask guests, what do you wish more people knew about health and healing? But you've laid it all out.
Thank you.
You've laid it all out. Yeah. What would you say to someone who was where you were when you were at your lowest point? What would you say to that person?
Yeah. If I was, to anyone who's listening, if you're struggling, number one, I want you to know that you're not crazy. You're not broken. You're a human being in pain. You're a human being with unmet needs. Period. End of story. It's like Johann Hari says, you're not a machine with broken parts. You're a human being with unmet needs. We don't need to try to fix broken parts. We need to figure out what those needs are and how we can get them met, right?
Yeah.
You make sense. Your struggle makes sense. There's a solution to your struggle. We may not be able to see it right now, but it exists in the world. And so for that person who's struggling right now, I want you to know that there are far more solutions to you in life than exist in trying to not be a part of it. A very courageous thing and very scary thing, but certainly courageous, is to say these two things. I don't know what I'm doing, and I want to know.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing is not the same thing as saying you're a failure. It just means this doesn't work. I'm aware it doesn't work. It's the act of surrendering, saying, I don't know which way to go. I bet there's someone out there who can give me a sense of some other way to do this thing. It may not be how I do it for the rest of my life, but it's certainly going to give me a sense of, will this work? So I like to talk about it like this. In 1969, the Apollo mission to the moon, right? I think this is the reason why people get so afraid for big changes, even dietary changes. The Apollo mission to the moon. We took people, we trained them as astronauts, put them on a rocket, fired them into space. They navigated to the moon. They landed on it. They got out of the moon and they walked around on the moon. One of the most extraordinary feats in human history. Also incredibly dangerous. They must have known what to do. They must have known exactly what to do. They would never put people in a rocket and fire them into space if they weren't confident they would get there. Do you know what percentage of the flight time they were actually on course to the moon? 2%. Now, that's so funny. Now, if you were to look at that data from a content perspective alone, you would go, spent 98% of the time going the wrong direction. This must be an absolute miracle that they made it there. What a failure of a mission. We can never repeat this again. However, if you were to actually look at it from what was actually taking place, they spent 98% of the time course correcting. 98% of the time figuring out how to safely get to the moon. That's what they were doing. It's going to feel like you're going the wrong direction a lot in the beginning. It can't not feel that way. You have to be okay with allowing the days to be explorations for you, figuring out not just what works, but getting very excited to figure out what doesn't work for you. It's a process of learning who you are and how you want to care for yourself, learning what looks like a yes for your life and what looks like a no for your life, and meeting yourself again and defining who you are in the world and becoming that caretaker for your life and your body that you haven't been in years. You get to maybe do this kind of thing for yourself 3-4 times in life, maybe in your business, maybe in your partnership with whoever you choose to spend your life with your kids, and with your health. Those might be the 4 times you ever really get to do this. And it is a sacred journey and it's yours alone. And it can be incredibly exciting, but you can't take it personally. You can't do that. You have to think about not why am I a failure? Why have the systems I've been using not allowed me to be successful? If you step back and look at it like that, you can go, oh, okay, clearly this doesn't work well. What if I just tried this today?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean that you failed in the previous attempt. Doesn't mean that this next one is the right attempt. It's just different and you're learning. So if you're a person who's struggling with substance use disorder, you're not a failure. The system you have been using to ease your pain no longer works. The system you have been using to ease your discomfort are now causing more discomfort. And I know the feeling, not understanding how in the world could what was the greatest solution in life have become the most dangerous problem I'd ever faced. And you're going to say, I could figure it out. I can get it back to the way it was if I could just get more. I know that feeling. Trust me. That is a recipe for disaster. You just have to be willing to say, I can't see what the other side of the hill looks like, but I know it's there. If you were to think about it in terms of meaningful connections, because this is what I really think we're looking at when we talk about addiction, because most people, when they check into addiction treatment, they'll go, well, you're checking in for addiction. Your problem is, so we need you to stop using it. Well, that's a dangerous thing to say. One, I think it's a dangerous question to ask is, why won't you stop? It's not a very good question to ask someone struggling with addiction. A better question to ask is, why does it make sense that you use? Because when you say that your problem is, what you're telling them is that their pain and what they lost in life means nothing, right? If it's just the chemical hooks, then the reason for their use is irrelevant. And that can be a dangerous road to go down. What you want to help them understand is that there are, I believe, about 5 loving and meaningful bonds that give people the experience of feeling meaningfully alive that have been severed. One is a loving and meaningful bond with yourself, both physically and emotionally, that you want to show up and be present for every single day. Next is a loving and meaningful bond with people in your life that you want to show up and be present for every single day. Next is a loving and meaningful bond with a purpose that you can share within a community of shared respect that you want to show up and be present for every single day. a loving and meaningful bond with the natural world that you want to show up and be present for every single day, and a loving and meaningful bond with a future that feels safe, makes sense, that you want to work for every single day. When these bonds are fully connected, there's so much about your life that you want to show up and be present for. And your presence requires two things: sobriety and active participation. Active participation in the moment, regardless of how it is in that moment, whether it's difficult, whether it's easy, whether it's fun, whether it's sad, whether it's happy, whether it's whatever it is, you want to actively be present for it. But as these bonds become severed, there's far less about your life that you want to be present for, because being present in this life is too painful a place to be. And so the solution to this is to bond with a use that removes you from being present.
Yeah.
So the solution isn't to just take it away. We have to reestablish those loving and meaningful bonds. So to those people who are struggling, those bonds exist for you. Give yourself time to rediscover them. Give yourself the gift of patience, that this thing doesn't happen for you tomorrow, but the tomorrow you're looking for is going to come. And I believe in you and I'm rooting for you.
That is so awesome. Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much for this powerfully healing conversation. You are going to help and inspire so many people.
I appreciate it.
So, Adam, if folks want to connect with you, follow you, to learn more about you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so I have a website, adamsud.com. Last name is S-U-D, adamsud.com. And I have an Instagram account, Plant-Based Addict. So you can follow me there. Also, there's a Facebook account, Plant-Based Addict. I'm not as active on Facebook as I am Instagram. And then I give talks at different events throughout the year. So if people are interested in coming to see me talk, I think the next one I'm doing is the Holistic Holiday at Sea Cruise, the Alaska cruise. I'll be giving 3 lectures on that cruise. So you get to spend 7 days on an Alaskan cruise, an entirely vegan cruise, with amazing other people that are going to be talking. Columbus Baptiste, Michael Greger is going to be there, Robert Cheek. And so that could be a cool thing if you're interested. And then I also still speak for Rip Esselstyn at all of the Plant Strong retreats. So if you want to see me in person, those are ways to see me in person, or you can follow me on Instagram or reach out to me through my website.
Awesome. Well, man, this has been such a powerful conversation. Thank you for just sharing your wisdom and your journey.
My pleasure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it with your audience. And if we have time, I'd like to end the way that I end everything.
Yeah.
When you get into treatment, unfortunately, you don't make it out with everyone. Not all of your friends make it with you. And I've lost 5 friends to overdose and more to suicide. And one of my dear friends had probably the best quote I've ever heard in my life. And I'm a guy who loves a good quote. And I remember before he died, he was talking and he said, Adam, there's this quote out there that says, if you want to be happy, you should live like it's the last day of your life. And I think that's a terrible quote. I said, what are you talking about? Well, Adam, think about it. If you really did live every day like it was the last day of your life, you wouldn't do all the things that are important for caring for your life. You wouldn't go to work, probably wouldn't do the laundry, go grocery shopping. These are important things. I think a better way to think about it is, if you really want to be happy, don't live like it's the last day of your life. Just treat everyone you meet as if they're living the last day of their life. And I try my best to do that. I'm not always the best at it, but I always, as a way to honor him, because this guy gave me so much in my recovery, and as a way of giving back, I end every talk I do by sharing that with everyone. So just keeping it alive in the world in some way.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.